Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I hope you're all well and keeping safe during this time. Please wear your masks, follow social distancing protocol, and get vaccinated as soon as possible. My name is Mashal Khan, Education USA advisor based in the US Educational Foundation. I'm a graduate of Syracuse University, New York, with a master's in teaching and curriculum. With me, I have my colleagues Isma Aslam, Syed Asad Ali Shah, and Raja Sohaib Jahangir. We welcome you all to the second session of our week-long virtual pre-departure orientation organized for students who applied to US institutions and are heading out primarily in the fall of 2021. Congratulations to you all on receiving an acceptance from a US university and getting admitted. You all have worked really hard. In order to help you prepare for your departure, we have organized daily sessions for you from Monday to Friday from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Pakistan time. Yesterday, our session was the topic that was covered in our session was preparation and arrival in the USA. Today, our topic under discussion is cultural adaptation and student life in the USA. In the days to come, we will be discussing the US classroom culture separately for both undergraduate and graduate students, and wrap the week with a current student and alumni panel discussion for undergraduate and graduate students. Today, we are here to help you understand ways to adapt to a new culture and student life in the USA. Please feel free to drop in your questions in the Q&A section. We encourage you to ask questions exclusively related to today's session, as we will be discussing other topics over the next few days. And you will have the opportunity to ask those questions then. A few housekeeping rules before we begin. Next slide, please. The session will run for approximately 1 hour. The session will be recorded and posted on Facebook on a later date. Questions will be addressed towards the end of the presentation, and you can use the Q&A box to leave your questions or comments. A little introduction about who we are. Education USA is a global network under the US Department of State, made up of over 425 international student advising centers in more than 175 countries. We are your official source to US higher education through Education USA advisors, working with advisees to provide updated, comprehensive, and unbiased information on higher education in the States. In Pakistan, we are part of the United States Educational Foundation, which is also the Fulbright Commission in the country. USEFP promotes mutual understanding between the people of Pakistan and the people of United States through educational and cultural exchange. We have offices in Islamabad, Lahore, and Karachi, but are available for any student that needs support or advising throughout Pakistan virtually through email and call. Given the current pandemic situation, Education USA Pakistan is completely virtual, so you can easily access our advising services and sessions online. Other than advising, USEFP also has a programs department that administers multiple fully funded programs, including the Fulbright Scholarship, and has an authorized prometric testing center at all 3 centers. You can find more information on our website, usefp.org. Coming back to our session, as mentioned, our topic under discussion today is cultural adaptation and student life in the USA. And to present on this, we have invited a very special speaker, professional in the field, Ms. Aleka Bilan. Ms. Bilan is a certified educational transitions coach with 27 years of experience in international school as a teacher and a school counselor. Her focus is on helping students transition to universities overseas and works as an individual coach for high school and college students in cross-cultural transition. We thank our presenter for taking out the time. If you have any questions during the session, please feel free to use the Q&A section. We will try to include as many of your questions as possible towards the end of our presentation. I would now hand it over to Ms. Aleka. Aleka, over to you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you. And thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the team of Education USA in Pakistan. And I'm looking forward to talking to you particularly about the cultural adaptation of moving to the United States, either as an undergraduate or as a graduate student. Pardon me just one moment. There we are. So I do want to talk a little bit about just what we're going to discuss today. Why it is important to have this as part of your pre-departure orientation, and the 3 elements that we're going to talk about in more specific terms about your particular situation are going to be on the cultural level, the practical level, and also the emotional level. So as I'm speaking this evening for you, thank you so much for attending. I do want you to think specifically about your situation of where you are headed to the United States and what of these particular pieces of information are going to apply specifically to you. So what are we going to discuss? As I said, we'll talk about cultural as well as cultural differences and cultural expectations for you. We do want to talk in very practical terms before you board the airplane in order to go to the United States. I know that visas and I-20s and DS-2019s are covered in separate sessions for the PDO, but we do want to talk about the current state of the COVID regulations in the different states of the United States, talking about how you can be successful, everything from how to make sure that you are budgeting correctly and budgeting well, where to find food and good food for you, what to pack, what not to pack, some very specific practical elements. We also want to talk about the emotional changes that will occur in moving to a different country for university study or for postgraduate study. So why is this important that you're here today? As Mashal said, you have worked incredibly hard to get here. You have achieved admission to a US university for either undergraduate or postgraduate work. You also hopefully have received scholarships and are making a financial commitment to attend university in the United States. And we all want you to be incredibly successful once you arrive. Really, the goal, of course, is to earn your degree from that institution, whether that's a bachelor's, a master's, or a PhD. And we want you to be able to be prepared so that when you get there, you are prepared not only for the academics that you have worked so hard for, but also very much for the cultural and the emotional and the geographic adaptations in order so that you can focus on your academic work. Remember that this is an investment in yourself and in your future and in the future of your family and your country. And so we really want you to begin your journey well. So how does this apply to you? Let's go step by step. When we're talking about culture, not only is that an important distinction from country to country, but also you'll see in the United States from region to region or even state to state. When we're discussing about culture, a lot of times it's helpful to think about culture as an iceberg. The tip of the iceberg is the visible culture, the surface culture. What we see on social media, on TV, in magazines, in movies, what we also see once we arrive in a country about the architecture, the buildings, the sights, the smells, the food, the dress, that kind of thing. So think about even your local culture of where you are located in Pakistan and how that might be different from the southern end of the country or the northern end of the country and what someone would notice. However, the part that really makes culture, as we say, sort of sticky or something that is part of who we are as human beings is that deeper culture, the part that we can't see. The deeper culture, some examples could be how individuals have a concept of time. Do you come from a culture where time is very specific and you should show up on time? Or do you come from a culture where time is very elastic and you can, time you can show up sort of around that time? You also might have some ideas of power structures in culture, some ideas of the role of particular genders in your culture, some ideas of what is polite and what is impolite. So it's the deeper culture that actually those norms of behavior as culture is actually where a lot of the misunderstandings can be. So if you think about moving to a new country as an opportunity to become more aware and learn and be more curious about the deeper culture, then you can go into relationships and learning about different areas coming from a position of curiosity rather than a position of defensiveness. And you can also come from a particular idea of being an ambassador of your own culture and showing beyond the surface of Pakistani culture, for example. So one aspect of American culture that is particularly happening at this moment in time that might be quite different from your own cultural experience is diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice movements in America. And one thing about American history, and I'm a former history teacher, is that the issues of race are a big part of the more than 400 years of American colonialism as well as American history. And as we have seen in the last year during the pandemic, the movement for the equity of Black lives has not only occurred in America, but in all over the world. And so these conversations happen often, even if you know, are studying chemical engineering, there will be conversations about race, about um, the movement for Black Lives Matter, that those will happen in the classroom, in discussions around the dining table, etc. The other part of diversity, equity, and inclusion in America is on the right-hand side. This is the Pride Progress flag, which is a symbol of LGBTQI plus rights, as well as the rights of both trans transgender and traditional gendered peoples, as well as people of color. So what you're going to hear and what you see, and I've even renamed my Zoom name. It's very common in America to introduce yourself, including your preferred pronouns. So technically, I am a cisgendered female, and so I prefer she and her. This, you can see this all over on campus, for example, in Title IX, legal movements in which the rights of particular genders are protected, um, everywhere from sports participation to safety on campus. So you're going to see this a lot more just in every single element of your campus life. And this is an example of how American culture is shifting and changing. And actually, there's a lot of people in the United States that are resisting some of these changes as well. So there's definitely tension around these issues. You might want to think about where you're coming from culturally. This map represents the different colors from the deep oranges and the orange colors, you know, sort of North Africa, Central Asia, East Asia, and Latin America. These are much more collectivist cultures. So where family is important, where groups are important, where group identity is important. The green countries, you know, Australia, the Northern European countries, are the opposite end of the spectrum, where people are much more individualistic. So much more about who they are and who they're going to be in the world. What you may find, for example, and we were listening to a speaker yesterday who was talking about this, is that maybe your first day in a graduate school classroom, you'll be asked to introduce yourself, who you are, and who you want to be in the world. And this might be a very different classroom experience than you may be used to. So that's how cultural differences may come up as you are entering the classroom, as you are having conversations with your peers all around campus. So, how do we get ready now that we understand that the culture is going to be different and we need to know our own culture in order to be curious and understand and try to learn about other people's culture? What else do we need to know? What else do we need to put in our suitcase technically before we get on the plane to go experience this new culture? Of course, all of us are talking about the COVID pandemic, and it's really very important that you understand specifically what is happening on your particular university campus, on your institution. What are their regulations? You know, what are the regulations for vaccines? What are the entry requirements for you coming from Pakistan and showing proof of a negative PCR test within how many hours of boarding the plane? What is the specific entry requirements for the city or the state that you are landing in? This is also very different from state to state in the United States. So I think that what you need to know is not only your individual institution status, but the fact that regulations and requirements are going to be different all across the United States. So this is the latest data. There's this website that you can see here, has the latest data of which universities are requiring vaccinations in order for students to begin study in the fall of 2021. So it's a very interesting map because what you see in the yellow dots, these are all the public institutions. So for example, all the public universities and state universities of the University of California system. What you see here are the gray dots are the private institutions. So you'll see one here in Florida, you see 3 private institutions in Texas, etc. You'll notice that what they've done is that they have put the blue states are the states that voted majority for President Biden in the last election, and the red states are the states that voted majority for President Trump in the last election. What this just means, it's like shorthand for more conservative leaning states and more progressive leading states. So you'll see up here in the Northeast, in the Mid-Atlantic, in that region, there are many more public universities in the state of New York, for example, that are requiring vaccinations. So it's very important that you know where you're going, that you know what the regulations are, not only of that institution, of that particular state. I think the other thing that I see on this map a lot is that when we think about the America, we think of one big country, but what you really need to realize is depending on where you're going, the regional differences and the cultural differences of the regions in America are quite pronounced. And so your experience may be quite different than someone who is also coming from Pakistan, but is coming from going to a different state. So you really need to think about what are not only the cultural differences between Pakistan and the United States, but what are the cultural differences from state to state? A Western person has a very different outlook, for example, than a Southern raised person in US culture. Remember that one of the reasons why you're going there, the primary reason, the reason that you've worked so hard, is in order to be academically successful. And there are federally funded programs and grants on US campuses to help you to be successful. Remember, I talked about that individual approach in the United States. So, professors in the United States will expect you to take the initiative, make meetings with them, ask questions. They are available in order to guide your postgraduate research. They are available if you are going to be a teaching assistant as a master's student. And as an undergraduate student, they're available for office hours, etc. So it's really important that you do reach out to professors and you get their assistance and their help. The Writing Center is another example of support and resources that are on campus. So if you need help in putting together an academic journal article or writing your first essays in university as an undergraduate, then do check out the resources that they have on campus. The other thing that you'll notice about US style education, both at the graduate and the undergraduate level, is that small study groups are the norm. And so finding other folks that are in your classes, making a study group, going to a different area in the library or around campus classrooms, etc., in order to review and revise the study that you're embarking on together is a really important part of the experience. So you'll see it's actually more tailored, much more small group kind of thing, rather even when you're in a very large lecture hall situation, that you also have opportunities for smaller group work. The biggest question that my students and students that I've worked with around the world always ask is, how will I meet new people? How will I make friends? So in the undergraduate level, you're going to have the opportunity to join huge hundreds of clubs and organizations based on common interests. So I think the answer to how will I meet new people is find your common interests with others. And I've also just noted some apps that might be helpful, particularly if you were a graduate student and you're not living on campus, or many of your peers might be working colleagues. And so you may not see them around campus as much. And so you do need to reach out. I find that LinkedIn is quite helpful in order to connect with others. Facebook groups on campus. So there may be Facebook groups that are all about common interests on campus. So even a cooking group, or, a pickup soccer, football, but in America they call it soccer. Those kind of Facebook groups might be helpful. These two other apps are quite popular in the United States. One is called Meetup, and so it lists groups in your area. So you can search by zip code of, groups with a very particular interest who are going to, meet up together. And another very, very localized app is called Nextdoor. And so particularly if you're a graduate student and you're living off campus, Nextdoor has all sorts of things, the advertisements of things for sale, to, I lost my cat and has anyone seen my cat? So if you want to get very local, you can look at Nextdoor as well. And so that's the way that you're going to build new networks and build connections, beginning in the classroom and taking outside the classroom as well. One thing that I want to talk about outside the classroom is about campus safety and safety in general, and looking at safety in the United States. So you do want to think about where you are and where you're walking around campus and on campus. This is an important symbol that you may not have seen before. So on US university campuses, there are these blue light posts that are scattered throughout campus, regardless of how large the campus is. So let's say, for example, that you have gone with your study group to the library, and now that you're walking home, and your home is on the other side of campus and it's dark, and let's just say that you're feeling a little bit that you're not particularly feeling comfortable. This symbol will, you can push the button and says it is an emergency light pole. You can push the button and then you'll have campus police or you'll have an escort that can help you in order to feel safer. So this is a really good emergency system for you to be aware of that is unique to US campuses. As you may have been following in the media, there were, due to, well, I'm not going to say all of the reasons, but you may have concern about anti-Asian hate crimes and events that have been happening in the United States. I'm sorry to hold a passport from this country and have to talk to you about this. However, you do need to know that there are organizations and movements that are bringing awareness to this issue. And so if you want to visit this website, the Stop AAPI, Asian American Pacific Islander Hate, then you can go to this website here. And actually, there's even an opportunity to report a hate crime if you do see that. Hate crimes and free speech and personal well-being and protection, those are all also covered under what is called the Title IX Federal Act. And so that you are protected regardless of citizenship, and regardless of gender and gender orientation, you are protected in the United States. So you do need to take advantage of those resources. A big question, just changing slightly from safety to budgeting. The big question is, well, how will I stay on the budget? What can I expect to spend? How can I plan for my monthly expenses? How can that work with the scholarship or the grants that I have been given, especially the stipend that I've been given, for example, as a doctoral student? So I'm going to walk you through some of the biggest expenses and things that you want to think about. And also I want you to really think about your own situation and start thinking about planning for your monthly budget. So some of these expenses include a mobile phone plan. So the United States is a unique country in which most mobile phone carriers, there are different carriers here in the United States. So one tip I have for you is looking at your particular university site and seeing which carriers have coverage at that institution. This is particularly true if you're going to a small town or a more rural location that you're not going to be located in an urban center. You want to check on which cell phone carrier, they call it here, which cell phone carrier has that coverage. The other thing that you want to think about is what kind of plans. So in the United States, they have plans for mobile phones, a prepaid plan where that's sort of the normal thing that we have in other countries where you just top up by month, or you can have a contract in which you sign. That's called a postpaid plan, and you sign a contract for 1 or 2 years. You need to be really careful, particularly about data charges on these plans, and you need to think very carefully. So, for example, you do need to think about how are you going to communicate with your family and friends in back home in Pakistan. So, and how often will that be? And will that be on Wi-Fi? Will you be using FaceTime? Will you be using WhatsApp to communicate with your family? You also do need to have that conversation with your family before you leave, because the time zone difference is so vast. Is it going to be reasonable that you're waking up at 6 in the morning every day in order to speak with your family in the evening in Pakistan? Or is it going to be early morning for them and evening for you? And so you do need to figure out when and how, which method, and then that will impact your cell phone plan. Because, for example, if you want to be just on Wi-Fi for the calls, but then do you share a room or do you share a house? Would you like to go for a walk and show your family and friends the area around? Will you need data for that? So you do need to think about time zone, data, plans, etc. This can be a bigger expense, particularly if you go over data. So it's a really good thing that you research both before and once you get there, before you actually sign up for a plan. The other thing to think about is what you'll eat, right? Food is really important in culture, both in surface culture and deep culture. So, what will I eat? How will I access it? Um, for example, if you're an undergraduate student, you may have what's called a meal plan. So, you can get a card and you can eat at different eating establishments at accommodations on campus. Maybe you're sharing a small apartment as a graduate student and you're sharing a small apartment with a small kitchen in a house with others. And so you want to think about, well, what are the cooking implements that I can use? Will I be able to have, access to a stove? Generally, you'll have refrigerator, microwave, etc. What are the fire regulations of what appliances I can use to cook, etc. What I particularly talk about comfort food, when you're feeling when that you're missing home, that you're missing those flavors of home, what do you need exactly and how can you access it? I do know people from all sorts of different countries that do bring spices and spice packets in their suitcases. Um, for example, I lived in Indonesia, in Southeast Asia for a long time. And so my students would bring the spice packets because they were very small, but then they knew that they could buy like ramen noodles or quick noodles in the United States. So they would just buy the noodles in the United States, but they would bring the little spice packets in the suitcase. And so you really want to think about what's going to be comforting for me when I'm incredibly stressed. How will I be able to access that? Speaking of access, I really find that Google Maps is a really fantastic resource to figure out where you're going to go shopping, where you're going to access food, and think about expenses as well, right? So, if, for example, you do want to go out to eat at a restaurant, let's just take this example of this university in Georgia, right? So, here are the restaurants. I just did a Google search at that university what restaurants are nearby. So here they are. But you might want to think about, okay, well, how am I going to get to those restaurants? The United States has a tendency to be quite dominantly a car culture. There is public transportation as well, but the cities, et cetera, particularly outside of the New England and mid-Atlantic regions, were made for cars. So this is a huge interstate or a huge freeway. So how can you get from this side over to that side? Google Maps will show you the public transport links. Also, many students at university campuses do buy bicycles and use bicycles as a way to get around. Think about buying a very strong lock in order to lock your bicycle, but this is another expense, right? Are you going to buy the bike? You're going to buy the lock. What if the bike gets stolen? So you need to be careful thinking about how are you going to get around? How much does public transportation cost? Sometimes universities have a discounted rate for students, or sometimes students can ride public transportation for free, depending on your student ID card and your situation. So think about your transport. Are you going to be using Uber and Lyft all the time in order to go to the grocery store or in order to go to restaurants? Then that obviously is going to be a much higher expense for you. So think about where are you? What do you need? Where are you going to access it? And how are you going to access it from a transportation point of view? So, thinking about what you need, what you can buy, where you can buy it. Here's some tips about what not to pack with you from Pakistan and what to buy um, in the United States. So, particularly if you're an undergraduate and you're going to be in on-campus dormitory housing, this is a standard dormitory room in an undergraduate accommodation for two people. This bed is something called a twin XL, a twin extra long. It's a standard size bed in the United States for university students, and it does not exist anywhere else. So don't bring sheets and sheets, etc., from your bed at home, thinking that it's going to fit. Just wait until you get to the United States and then you can buy sheets here. If you're an undergraduate going to accommodation, universities also have a service where you can order online and have your things delivered to your dormitory campus. So do look at that as well. Again, thinking about you've landed your first day, you're jet lagged, you don't have sheets on which to sleep. How are you going to get sheets? Think about online delivery options. You also need to think about voltage and plugs. So don't bring your hair straightening iron or your shaver, your small grooming appliances, because the voltage might be quite different. And the first thing that you'll do is you'll have an adapter and you'll plug it into the wall, and then that appliance will burn up. So think about buying small appliances when you're here as well. Again, you can order online and you can have it delivered. Do think about, particularly if you're an undergraduate, if you have a delivery address. If you're a graduate student and you don't have your accommodation yet, you need to find your rental, then you may want to think about buying these things once you arrive. If you're going to a colder climate, it's not necessary to pack all your cold weather clothes from Pakistan, even though it does get obviously cold in Pakistan. Um, then you can just buy your cold weather clothes when the weather gets colder and when you're in that climate where they just make the clothes specifically for that climate. So if you're in a rainy climate, you can buy more rain and water resistant things. If you're in a snowy climate, you can buy just much warmer boots and that kind of thing. Really, the biggest advice that I think all of us on this call, both our Education USA advisors who have studied in the United States or studied overseas, and my experience over 20 years with all of my foreign students traveling to different countries, is do not overpack. Don't overpack. Just don't stuff that suitcase. Try to get the 23 kilos exactly. Think about the things that you can buy when you get to the United States and make more sense for that. But when you're thinking about your suitcase, do think about some really important things to pack. In the United States, obviously, you're going to pack clothes. And in the United States, students have a much more comfortable clothing vibe or aesthetic than in some other countries. Even in undergraduate, I've seen students going to, well, now with COVID particularly, but in non COVID times, going to attend classes in their pajamas. So that's not completely shocking. So you do want to think about wearing comfortable clothes that you don't have to bring a lot of formal, more, professional clothes. You also want to think about things that are comfortable from home. So perhaps maybe you have a blanket or a pillow that maybe you got from your grandmother or that you've had since your childhood. Do think about packing that and do think about bringing not, a huge blanket that's going to take your entire suitcase, but some small things that are going to make your living arrangements cozy if you're sharing a dormitory room or you have a room in a shared apartment as a graduate student. I also strongly suggest that you print out photographs or bring small posters, things that remind you of home, friends, family, places that you love, in order to really help you make your space be really your own and give you things from home. Particularly if you are in a shared space or a shared kitchen, all these kitchen gadgets and appliances you can obviously get in the United States. Think about that in your budget. But if you have you'll have your own room, you can really try to make your room feel very homey and very cozy, and bring lots of elements that remind you of home. So one thing that you won't pack in your luggage, but will come with you, is all of the emotions that you're bringing with you. And so let's think about how to navigate those emotions. The first thing I really want to introduce you to, if you haven't seen before, is something that's known as the culture shock curve, or really the personal transition curve. Any kind of changes that we're going through, including all of us with the changes in the pandemic and having to move to remote learning and remote work, we all really experience these emotions. So generally what we talk about is that when you first arrive and you're pretty excited about being in a new place with a fresh start. You're really amazed that you actually got there and are really meeting new people and learning new things. This is what we call sort of the honeymoon period of, oh, so much excitement and so great. Notice, however, that as time passes, and I have no units of time, so this can be different for every single individual, but as time passes, you may start having doubts and say, oh, wait a second, this is much harder than I thought in ways that I did not anticipate. Or, oh my gosh, I really sort of regret this situation. What have I done? What am I doing? So you also may feel home definitely homesick. It may be the food might be quite different, or the climate might be quite different, and you really are finding some differences and difficulties that you did not anticipate. And you might be feeling really homesick. You might be feeling really low. I want you to know that this is absolutely normal. This is actually an expected turn of events when you're moving across cultures and across countries. So you will find this sort of U shape of culture, and do know that you will come out of it and you will feel more settled in the end. I have no guarantee of when that might happen for you, but research has also shown that if you know that this is happening, then the highs are less high and the lows are less low. So if you know that it's normal to experience these highs and lows in this transition, then you can get through it in a way that is a little bit more smooth. However, it's really important to take care of yourself and your well being in order to help yourself with this transition. So, know yourself and know what you need for your well being resources. Do you need to work out? Is fitness a big part of your stress management? Know that most universities have great fitness centers that are available for undergraduate and graduate students, either for free or for a small fee. They include, gyms and indoor pools and all that kind of thing. So do know that that's available. You can research ahead of time what the resources are and how close or far they are from where you will be staying. Maybe you also need to like take a breath, get out in nature, or take a walk around the city for your stress relief and your well-being. Maybe you need to make sure that you have time for prayer and meditation and solitude and quietness. So do also look at, what prayer rooms are available on your campus and nearby in the community. If there is an Islamic community that is in the city that you want to become a part of. So do research those kinds of things ahead of time. The other thing is you do need to know that there are mental health and physical health and well-being resources on campus. So if you are in that low part of the culture shock curve and you feel that you've been there for a little while and it's hampering your ability to go about your purpose there, attend classes, engage with your peers and your colleagues, do your research. If that is really taking some more time, then I do really ask that you search out those mental health and well-being resources. If you are feeling ill, if you're feeling sick, then do go to the campus clinic, etc. Now, do remember, however, that health insurance is quite different in the United States, and you want to check about what is covered and what is not covered in your health insurance. So if you're feeling ill, then do go to the campus clinic, etc. If there is an emergency, a life-threatening emergency, then the emergency number in the United States is 911, and that can bring the ambulance, the fire department, emergency services, etc. However, do realize that an ambulance, for example, isn't always covered under your insurance. And so before you leave, pre-departure, you need to check out what is covered and what is not covered in your health insurance. And the final note that I want to talk to you about is a concept that we talk about in transitions all the time, in that you've got to leave well in order to enter well. So you're very excited. You've made this wonderful opportunity to study in the United States. You have scholarships, you have grants, you're getting your visa, you're getting the right the vaccinations that you need, you're getting the PCR test, you're doing a lot of work. You've achieved a tremendous amount. You don't want to ignore the emotional side of the transition, because if you do, then when you arrive, those emotions have come with you, and it makes it more difficult to engage and enter into this fresh start that you're looking for. So let's think of some four interrelated components of your moving to this other country. We call this process the raft. You are building yourself a raft that carries you over the river to this new culture and this new country. The elements of the raft are these four. They include reconciliation, which means forgiveness. And so you want to reconcile yourself to your situation, for example. Most of you did not anticipate that your final year of secondary or undergraduate study was going to be almost wholly online. And so you really just need to accept that as a fact of what it is, and you need to move on without the bitterness that goes with that. Another element that's a really wonderful element is affirmation. This is the gratitude piece, really taking the time to thank those family members, those friends, those professors and teachers who have supported you on this journey, those Education USA advisors who have helped you this whole time. This is where you have your gratitude, your affirmation, actually taking the time to say thank you for your help on this journey. Take the time also to do official farewells, not necessarily, oh, hey, I'll see you, in a year's time, or I'll catch you on WhatsApp or Snapchat. Actually having those dinners, those goodbye dinners, those a lunch, a coffee with a friend, really saying goodbye to your family, making sure that you are taking the time to have those rituals. And the T stands for think and plan destination. And so actually this entire presentation and the fact that all of you are showing up here today means that you are taking care of that. So be sure to build yourself a very strong raft. I know that all of you will be successful academically. You will bring Pakistani culture to the United States and learn about the particular region of the United States where you are headed. We are so pleased for you that you have achieved this great opportunity. And we're so pleased that you are going to go to the United States and in most likely study in person. So best wishes to you on your journey. I want you to take a moment at this time to just reflect about any pieces of this that have resonated with you, anything that you still need to take care of or do, any questions that you still have. So I'm going to be quiet for a moment. I want you to take some individual reflection time. Okay, and then now we're a little bit curious, right? So we've come to the end of my portion of the presentation. I'd like to ask a few things. We wanted to make sure that you've covered what elements are important, why it's important for you to prepare for these elements, and how specifically you will take those steps. So if you could, at the moment after your reflection, just enter into the chat one takeaway, one idea, one element that you are taking with you today. And so if you can just pop that into the chat, it'll be fun to see what everyone's takeaways are. And again, I'm getting you ready for sort of a US style, American style education presentation. So if you can just pop one word into the chat of an idea that you've taken from this presentation.
So should I read them out to you?
Sure,
Aleka?
because I can't see them. Yeah.
Reconciliation and farewells, pack smart, raft, cultural shock are okay, success, everything will be okay at the end, expect the unexpected, raft approach. The transition curve was very helpful, smart packing, leave well to get well, approaching new concepts with open-mindedness, transition is important for success. Very nice takeaways.
I like the pack smart as well.
Pack smart, yeah.
Pack smart. Pack smart. Unfortunately or fortunately, the United States is a very consumeristic society. I'm actually shocked. I haven't lived here for 15 years and now I'm living here for the past 1 year. And I'm shocked of how much everything is based on shopping. So don't worry, you can find it here. I just want to thank you so much, Michelle, for reading those out. I just want to leave with you my contact details as well. because I will be in your time zone. I will be within 3 hours. And so I am a transitions coach. I can help you in your journey. I can help you figure out what next steps might be. So if you just need a question or some support or some help, then do reach out. I am Aleka Bilan at alekabilanconsulting.com. So I appreciate that greatly. And I do think that now we're moving on to the more fun aspects of the presentation, correct?
Yes. But first, we're going to address any questions from the audience. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A. Thank you, Aleka, for a comprehensive presentation. We really appreciate all the details that you have provided to our outbound students on the American culture, identifying resources available to them on campus, tips to remain successful as an international student while highlighting the cultural, emotional, and practical transition. As promised, we will now be taking your questions from the audience. Please feel free to drop in the questions in the Q&A section. We encourage that you ask questions exclusively related to today's session, that is adapting to the US culture and leading a successful life as a student in the USA. As we will be discussing the US classroom culture, followed by a current student and alumni panel discussion in days to come, so you'll have the opportunity to ask other questions in our upcoming sessions. So I can see a few questions. Aleka, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. So our first question is, I'm heading to Salt Lake City in Utah, which is predominantly populated by the people of LDS Mormon community of the Mormon faith. Any cultural tips or ideas specific to that?
Thank you so much. I think that's a great question. I think the very first start, as with any culture and institution, is on campus. So I would say really making sure that you're doing your research on your own campus for your own interest groups, et cetera. And sometimes when you look at the campus clubs and organizations, that gives you quite what they list and what they don't list gives you quite an insight into what could be. So for example, if they're listing an Asian American club, if they're listing a South Asian club and organization, then you'll know that there is support for you on campus for your culture, etc. The Church of Latter-day Saints actually is quite an internationally minded faith because of their mission, history, and experience. So you'll find that many Mormons, particularly male Mormons, men, have been out on mission all over the world in those 2 years in between secondary and higher ed and tertiary education. And so you may find some, whereas on the surface, you might find a white man who's a Mormon, but actually if you have a coffee with them and if you have a conversation, you may realize that they may have traveled in South Asia for their missionary work and they might have a whole nother perspective on culture. So I would say, make sure that you're looking for resources on campus of what that you are looking for comfort, and also be curious about those who are of the Mormon faith, because again, many of them have had lots of international experience.
Thank you. Next question is, how do I report hate crime, discrimination, or any other felony? Report first to the university or just call 911? And what is the most appropriate response to hate or crime speech?
Okay, so that's a huge question and an incredibly important and brave one. So thank you for asking it. I would say let's just talk before, right? Let's do a pre-departure position. And actually, this is a theme for the whole presentation, which is do your research now, do your research beforehand, particularly for your institution and for your area, because you don't want to be trying to find those resources when you're in a crisis mode. Like when you're in crisis of you've just experienced a hate speech or hate crime against you. You don't want to be in crisis when you're feeling incredibly ill. You don't want to be in crisis and then look for the resources. So figure out what your resources are ahead of time. With that vein, go onto campus and see, because of Title IX and federal law, what their institutional policies are and what is protected speech on campus. And where do you report if that hate speech or hate crime occurs on campus, in a classroom, in an accommodation, in a dining room? what are the policies of that institution? Every single institution must have those policies and must have them published. You now have access to the sort of behind the website things, so you have like mystudent.edu login of your institution. Use it, ask questions now. And then ask that question to the institution. If I am walking home to my off-campus graduate school accommodation and something happens and I'm not on campus, what do I do? Do I call 911 first? Do I call the campus security first? So that's going to be different from campus to campus, and it's important to do that research ahead of time. Very important. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Aleka. And I'd just like to add that once you arrive on campus, you'll have several different kinds of orientation. So you're going to have your program orientation or your degree orientation, and they're going to make you aware of all the situation, like the public safety situation in particular, and will let you know of the resources that you can use in times of emergency. So look out for that information as soon as you arrive on campus. Our next question is, um, will I face any issues with discrimination from professors or students if I were to wear my cultural native dress on campus?
Well, I can't control or guarantee what other people will do or react, but generally, no. When the former President Trump was elected, there was a lot of concern about the acceptance of others in the United States. And there was a huge campaign that was actually led by Temple University in Philadelphia called "You Are Welcome Here." I think that what you'll find is that every single university, international students and internationalism are a very big part of what they want to experience and what they want their local students to experience. I mean, one of the reasons why you have been admitted and you have been granted scholarships, et cetera, support in order for you to attend is because they want you in all of your culture and your cultural, your cultural specific external culture wear. So for example, if you wear a hijab, or if you're wearing a headscarf or head covering, that is all absolutely acceptable. And I think that you'll find that universities are looking for that cultural exchange. That's why US universities want so many foreign students to come to their campuses. So yeah, but tied to the previous question, also do find what your resources are if unfortunately you experience hate crime or hate speech.
Thank you, Aleka. Next question is, how do you reach out to students to form a study group or a social group if you are shy or you're not a social bird?
I think that that's why I mentioned those apps. So I think sometimes starting online, we think that online apps are only for dating, for example. There are many dating apps, all over the world and in the United States as well. But really mentioning those those apps, LinkedIn is that the professional connection, and so you could direct message somebody, use messaging in LinkedIn or in Facebook. It is not unusual to, at the end of a class seminar or a lecture, if you're walking out together, to say, hey, would you like to, can I ask you a question? Would you like to, it is a little bit hard. You do have to sort of take the initiative, but asking someone as you're leaving class. The other thing that you could do is you could ask the professor, say, I'm interested in forming a study group. Would you be able to help me with that? And then they could maybe identify some students and make a small group for you.
Thank you. What is typically a minimum monthly budget range for a bachelor student and a married student? So this is a a bachelor student and a married student.
It really, really depends on where you're going to live. And it absolutely depends on what else is covered. So for example, the total cost of attendance of undergraduates in the United States includes your accommodation, includes access to meals, like I said before, a meal plan. It includes even activities fees like access to the gym. It includes a textbook subsidy sometimes. You need to look at your scholarships of what's covered in your textbooks and your notebooks, that kind of thing. So it really depends on what is covered in any kind of aid or scholarships that you have. Also depends on where you're living. If you're going to New York City, that's going to be incredibly expensive. If you're going to South Dakota, that's going to be much less expensive. So I think that that's why I was giving you those practical tips ahead of time, is go specifically to your institution and to your area and figure out what is the transport, what is the food, what are the food prices, what are the rental prices for that particular area. You can even use the zip code of the mailing address of your institution to do those kinds of searches. What is the average grocery bill in this zip code? And so then you can plan ahead in that way in order to really set yourself. I think the thing that students have difficulty of staying on budget is not knowing what the expenses are going to be. But if you know what the expenses are and you plan ahead for that, then I think that you can have a much easier time and not be surprised if you're going over budget.
Thank you, Aleka. And I'd like to add over here, there are many resources available online as well, where you can check out the cost of living of a particular area, and you can also compare the cost of living of two areas. For example, if you're living here in Pakistan, in Islamabad, you can compare it to wherever you're going in the US and kind of determine what your cost of living is going to be or what your monthly expenses are going to be. There's a website called Numbeo, Numbeo. And you can check this information on that numbeo.com. If one of my colleagues would also type this in the chat box. Thank you. Our next question is cultural adaptation linked to academic success?
Absolutely. Next question? No.
Some detail, a little detail.
Yes. I think that what we, as students that you've been working so hard for either accessing the doctoral level or the undergraduate level, I think that it's easy to just focus on the academics because that's what you've been focused on so far. But if you disregard the cultural adaptation, if you disregard the emotional changes that you're going to go through, then you're going to be at a disadvantage academically. So yes, in the US parlance, we call this social emotional learning. So if you take care of the social emotional learning, then your academic learning will follow. If you don't take care of that social emotional learning, then eventually your stress, your academic learning, your focus, that will fall apart. And so the whole reason of why you've worked so hard in order to go to the United States will sort of deteriorate. So I do encourage you to take both of them hand in hand.
Thank you. Another question is, do you have tips to share if you want to find a suitable accommodation place in advance, if you're planning to live off campus?
Yes, again, go to your university website because they are able to support you. So if you are looking for graduate housing off campus, there are the housing office at the university will have websites where you can go and look for rentals that most graduate students go to. They can help you with just getting started, I would say, on that. They're not going to help you with negotiating your lease with your landlord. They're not going to help you if your roommate ate your yogurt in the refrigerator, but they will help you to get started and point you in the right direction rather than you landing at the airport with your suitcase and then suddenly wandering around the city trying to find accommodation. I do need you to know that economically right now, the United States is experiencing a massive housing market bubble. So housing for sale is incredibly expensive, like ridiculously expensive right now, just because of what's happening with the economics of the country reopening. So housing sales are very high, therefore rental prices are higher than usual, regardless of location. So, Spokane, Washington to Destin, Florida, just be prepared that the rental, do your research for average rental prices and go to the university housing office and say, hey, this is a 1-bedroom apartment that is charging this much. That sounds absolutely crazy to me. Is that about average? And they can tell you whether that's the average price for rentals in that market at that time.
Thank you, Aleka. And one thing I'd like to add over here for all the students who are leaving for the US now, do not sign any lease, do not pay anything before you actually are in the US, before you actually see the place whatever you're going to be renting out, the apartment, whether you're sharing it or whether there's a room in the house. Do not pay for anything beforehand before you actually arrive in the USA. Because there's all kinds of fraudulent activity going on this. So make sure that you actually are physically there and visiting yourself and signing the deal in person. I think we are going to head to our last question. Are we allowed to travel to other places after arriving in the USA, or are there any restrictions? And is it easier? Is it easy to go around and explore other cities?
So at the moment, again, each state has different regulations, but mostly the United States is having very high vaccination rates, particularly in certain states. Certain states have over 70% of their population over the age of 12 has been vaccinated. There's been a huge vaccine rollout in the United States. The other note that applies to you as students going to the United States is that if you have not had a chance to be vaccinated yet, vaccines are free and you can get them right after you land. You can go to like the local pharmacy and you can just get a Pfizer or Moderna vaccine easily, or a Johnson & Johnson single dose. So just so if you want to plan ahead for your vaccinations, one of the things that states are doing in order to open up universities and K-12 institutions is a big vaccine rollout right now in July and August. So you can plan to do vaccines when you arrive. So because of that vaccine rate, travel is quite easy. States did not close their borders in the United States. And that's not, I mean, yeah, that's a whole nother reason why yes or why no, but states did not close their borders. What you do need to look at is what are the requirements of the state when you arrive. Most states, there's no requirements. I just came to a different state 2 days ago, was no requirement. Now, how easy is it to travel around the country? It's a very large country. Even driving distances are quite large. To get from the bottom end of Florida to the top end takes 10 hours of driving. To get across Texas could take you more than a day. Just to give you an idea, to drive from the bottom to the top of California would take you 12 to more than 12 hours actually. So just to give you an idea of distances. So again, America is very much a car culture. There is public transport that you can use to cross from state to state. Trains in certain parts of the country are not particularly available or cheap. Trains are quite available in the New York, Boston, Washington, DC area. But not as much in other parts of the country. So traveling by train can be expensive and it can be not very available. Traveling by bus is possible. It takes a long time. It's cheap, but it takes a long time. And you have to be careful about safety. Some bus stations are sort of in what we call like sketchy areas of town. Most Americans travel by plane. And that's how they go across distances, or they drive a car. But you won't be able to have access to a car. So again, looking at budget, right? Time, money, looking at that and how easy it is to access other areas of the country.
Thank you so much, Aleka, for answering all the questions. I hope this was helpful for our attendees. Moving on, if you could please switch the next slide.
Oh,
we would like to.
So sorry, I stopped the share. Would you want me to continue?
Yes, please. If you could
Okay.
share the last.
No
slide.
problem. So sorry. Can you see?
Not yet. Yes. So if you can switch the slide, please.
So sorry.
Thank you.
Oh, yes, I forgot about this. This is very exciting.
Yes. So moving on, we would like to inform you of an online workshop on managing culture shock being hosted by Education USA Pakistan in collaboration with Dr. Jim Robinson and Mr. Ethan on July 27th from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. This 2-hour online workshop explores how an improvisational mindset can help international students navigate culture shock. We will be sharing the registration information via email soon. So if you're interested, please be on the lookout for this information. Once again, thank you all very much for attending the second session for our virtual pre-departure orientation. We have the information for you to join our sessions on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, respectively. But we will surely send you all a reminder. Tomorrow, we will be discussing the US classroom culture for undergraduate students and for graduate students the day after. So please do join us with your questions again from 5 to 6 p.m. If you need to speak to an Education USA advisor, we are here for you. Please contact your assigned advisor. If you do not know who your assigned advisor is, please email your nearest center. You can check out the center emails on our slide or register for our free advising services by visiting our website, educationusa.pk. We also highly encourage you to follow us on our social media platforms, each of Education USA Pakistan, USEFP, and the US Embassy to stay updated. Any parting words from our presenter before we formally conclude our presentation and move to the quiz?
Good luck on the quiz. I felt like I was having a quiz with all of your excellent questions. I would just ask someone from the Education USA team if you could capture both the chat and the Q&A. I would be most intrigued to see what the other comments were. Best of luck to you on your journey, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you all. Have a good evening.